This video is to show how I designed and built the bag pull tracker for JMB coins. I'm recording a voiceover for those who are interested in how I did it and the tricks I used. I started out with a block of butternut. It was a chunk of a log that a friend of mine had cut down in his yard. And I got some of the wood, milled it up, and it sat in my shop for a while. Here I didn't record the milling part of it. Here you can see I'm getting a piece of scrap wood to use as a spacer between the fence and the miter gauge. You never want to use a rip fence and a miter gauge together. Originally I was going to take the spacer out. I ended up not. It's somewhat dangerous, but it worked. I just turned on my shop vac with the fine baffle on to suck most of the sawdust out of the saw as it's produced. As you could tell by the plume of dust that shot back past me, it's not anywhere near 100%. The saw really bogs down if I take all that in one pass, so I made a shorter cut to square up the end. You can see that the bottom of it was almost nothing, and the top of the block had probably 1/16 of an inch of wood, so it was nowhere near square when I started. Now I'm doing the other end. Lower it. They can adjust it over and make just about cut about half of the thickness of wood at one time. This is the first time I'd ever worked with butternut. It was really nice to work with, though it scorched pretty easily. It's not too terrible. It's not like cherry that you look at cherry too strongly and it burns. You probably saw right there, I turned the saw on and nothing happened. It's because I have a remote cutoff, so I can turn the saw off from the right side of it. It's basically a extension cord with a switch and outlet on the end of it, and I have my table saw plugged into that, and then that plugged into the wall. Makes it safer. There was some wind shake in the wood, so I didn't notice it until after it was milled up and ready to go. I didn't have another size piece of wood that is the right size for this. I didn't want to make it too much smaller, so I'm gluing it together. Take the polyvinyl acetate, aka white glue, school glue, and set it on the crack, and then I'm using a business card to draw the wood in. That rumbling you can hear in the background from time to time, that's the bearing that is bad on my air cleaner. The air cleaner is basically a squirrel cage like you'd have for your furnace. It's mounted in a wall, in a box that's set into the wall. I have a filter to filter out the dust on both the intake and a bag on the output side of it. Not only does it filter the dust out, it also keeps a flow of air coming into the workshop to try to keep the dust somewhat confined. It works pretty well. I just have to get a replacement bearing for the squirrel cage because it went bad and it's groaning an awful lot. As you can see, the business cards get saturated pretty easily, so you have to use a couple of them. But you basically just flex the wood a little bit and draw the glue down to get the glue down into the crack. Just wipe off the excess, and then I take the bar clamps that you see laying there. They're the ones from Harbor Freight. It's one of the best bargains they have when it comes to tools. And you can tell by how much glue squeezed out, there's adequate glue to hold the block of wood together. In the background there, with the between the black cabinet and the yellow cabinet, is the air cleaner I mentioned. Basically just sucks the air in, filters the dust out when it comes in, and then the finer dust when it is exhausted in my laundry room. And then there's a slight flow of air coming out of the laundry room into the rec room and then into the workshop to try, it tends to keep the dust inside the shop more. That green thing I have hanging in front of it lets me know when it's time to change the intake filter. When that no longer is drawn to the filter, I know it's plugged up and there's not much air going through it. I do not have a drum sander. I'm sorry, a surface sander, not a drum sander. You know what I'm saying. And the piece of wood is, the grain is going the short way, so it's too short to use on a surface planer. So I am using the belt sander to sand off the excess glue and basically make it smooth. That stick I just rubbed on the belt is a belt cleaning stick. It's basically a piece of rubber, and with it, when you rub it on the belt, it will clean up all the gunk that is trapped in between the abrasives. The belt cleaning stick I have is probably 5-6 years old, and it's maybe 1.5 inches shorter than when I first got it, so they last a long time. And I'm able to reuse my belts for a long time compared to what it was with me not using it. Going through a lot more belts. This seems to go on for a long time in the video. That's nothing compared to what it was in real life. I was standing there for probably 3/4 of an hour, sanding all 4 sides of it. That little gizmo that lights up right there is called a Wixie. It allows me to set the angle of things precisely. It has a little magnetic base on it. So here I'm setting the angle of my table saw to be 60 degrees, For this, it really isn't that important that it's that precise. However, if you use something on the order of like picture frames or boxes, it's important that the angle is right. If they're not exactly 45 degrees, your picture frame isn't going to line up, you're going to have gaps, etc. That little $30 gizmo is fantastic for that. And right there is the block of wood. I'm examining the grain to see which side I want to have up. If you'll notice, you can't even tell where the glue line is. By clamping it together, it became so fine that you can't see it. Alright, I left the blade angled at the same 60 degrees, and I drew a line on there. Initially I was going to take the cutoff piece and put it in the back to use as an additional support. However, it turned out not to be necessary. I did some testing, and what I wanted is to have a piece. That's how I had envisioned it. Just glue that on and go from there, but it really wasn't needed. I wanted to have something that you could put in there. There's my zero clearance gauge made out of a piece of 1/4 inch plywood. Can't use the zero clearance gauge with the saw blade on an angle, so I had to switch it out to the standard factory throat plate. I'm making it so that a piece of Luan will fit in there very nicely. That way pieces of paper can be fit in there. If you want to make a sign and have it in there, it's very easy to do because it's a standard size piece of plywood. I don't care for plywood myself. I think it's cheating, but it's very dimensionally stable. And it's a little bit tight right there. But I think it will be enough. Tap the fence over the slightest little bit. Take off probably a 64th of an inch to make the slot a little bit looser, because there does have to be some finish inside the slot as well. And that's right about good. The throat plate, the zero clearance throat plate right there, is about 1 foot long and 3 inches wide. Right then I should have been my clue that you don't need to have the that extra support piece on there, but the block of wood will support that throat plate very easily, and that's going to be heavier than pretty much anything you're going to want to display on it. And here it is back to the belt sander. I'm sanding the freshly cut face, and then going over to that little schniblet that I sanded up or cut off, sanding that. look in the background, you can see that I changed out the filter in the air cleaner between these because it was clogged up. Nice freshly clean filter in there right now. That doesn't last very long. It never lasts very long. And here I'm cutting it off because there's a lot more sanding to go, but what the sanding is boring to do, it's even more boring to watch. Here I'm using the throat plate to sand, basically using a sanding block to sand the inside of the slot because it's full of saw marks. I could have used a regular piece of 1/4 inch plywood for this, but I had that handy. Why not use it? There is a piece of pine sitting on the saw that you can see behind me. That is a piece that I milled up out of a piece of a pallet, of a board off of a pallet, I should say. If you watch my video on the Lichtenberg wood burner, you probably recognize that same block of wood. Here's basically a grid pattern I printed out on a laser printer of 25 very evenly spaced dots. I cut it out and put it on, and then this is a trick. There's my wood burning pen with a flat puck in it, and basically just rub it over the paper, and there it goes. It transfers the toner from the paper onto the wood somewhat. Quite frankly, this is the only way I can wood burn and not have it look like a drunk kindergartner wrote it. I'm not really wood burning this part of it. This is just so that I get a very evenly spaced grid for the holes. Computer's super easy to create a grid of holes with, so why not use it? And there you can see that the paper is actually stuck to the wood because the toner is gluing it on, and because it's you have to print it backwards, because when you put the paper toward the wood, if you look through the paper, that's how it's going to be on the wood, because you're looking at the print from behind. So I basically put my printer in mirror image mode so that whatever I print to it, it prints a mirror of it rather than what I printed. And then I just wrote out jbcoinsinc.com and their email address, sized it so that it will fit. I actually printed it out half a dozen times in different sizes before I went into the shop. And then tape it on so that it doesn't move. If it moves at all, the wood burning, the pattern that I use to wood burn is going to turn out looking blurred, and we are already established that I'm terrible at wood burning, so make sure it's taped on well. And then the same thing, very hot wood burning iron. You can see it just scorched the paper right away. It's actually probably too hot, because when I get done with this, you'll see that the wood itself has been scorched a little bit. I was able to sand it off, but it was a lot hotter than it needed to be and caused problems. So all this does is it transfers the toner from the paper that was printed on onto the wood, and then from there, that's very, very fragile. You can take and scrape it off with your fingernail if you want. You can scrape the black off the wood. So I'm using it basically as a pattern so that I don't look like an idiot wood burning. And here you'll see it peel too. This is, I noticed that the one letter wasn't entirely done. I'd skip part of it. You can see it's actually stuck to the wood. I'm peeling as I go and looking so that if I have to need a new or need some further transfer of any given letter, I can do that and still have the paper in the same location because I didn't undo both pieces of tape at once. So there's the transfer. I said that black print on there is extremely fragile. I take my fingernail and scrape it off. So then I go and for about the next hour and a half or so, I wood burned. Even somebody like myself who is absolutely terrible at wood burning, when you have a pattern like that, it's very easy to do. All you have to do is basically trace. I have a very cheap wood burning pen. Wood burning iron, I guess you'd call it. Basically like a soldering iron with different tips. Here I'm sanding off the remaining toner to make sure that I got it all off and all of the letters are wood burnt, and then going back over and darkening in what needs to be. I really should have cut this part short. I was rather pleasantly surprised at how the butternut turned out. As you can see, it did scorch a little bit when I transferred the pattern to it, but not terrible, and it burnt pretty easy. I cannot describe to you how bad I am freehand wood burning. Actually, I think I have the, I think you'll see coming up how bad I am. I tried freehand burning the bottom of it. I think that you might get a shot at that. I ended up sanding it all off all the wood burnt part of it, sanded it off, and then took a made another stencil, traced it on, and wood burnt the bottom of it as well. And right there I'd be careful because I have the burning pen hanging from its cord and it's really close to my leg. And there you go. That's how that looks. Yeah, there's my drunken kindergartner signature. I think I might have put these steps out of order, these videos out of order rather, because there are holes in it. I don't remember seeing the shot of the drill press yet. Oh well. I set a depth stop on the drill press so that each hole is the same depth. This is the most satisfying part about woodworking, is putting the finish on. The finish I'm applying is a shellac. I cut the shellac half and half with denatured alcohol. Denatured alcohol is the solvent in shellac, so it basically thins it down. It also will absorb better. And then I add about 20% by volume of boiled linseed oil to it. That makes it so that you have that deep, rich color, as well as makes it flow so that you can wipe it on very easily. As you can tell, I'm just using a scrap piece of paper towel and just wipe it on. Right there you can see some of the glue that I was left over from that little piece of triangular cut off I was going to glue on there. I actually did glue it on and then took it off because it looks stupid. So you can see the staining, the white stain that was on the back of it, and that was from the glue preventing the finish from being absorbed, the same as with the rest of the wood. So I'm putting a thin coat on the entire thing. The key to making it so that it doesn't blotch is to do exactly that. You put a thin coat of finish on, let it dry, which the shellac will dry very quickly, and once it's dry, then you start building up your coats. Shellac is super nice too, in that not only can you wipe it on, it's a very forgiving finish, it's also what's known as a coalescent finish, which is basically a fancy word meaning that each coat that you put on will melt into the previous coat. So if you put on a finish and then it gets scratched, if it's a polyurethane finish, something like it's, you know, polyurethane or something on that order, you know, varnish, it's made up of multiple very thin layers. They don't burn into the previous layer very much. That's why you have to scuff sand so that it will adhere well. Shellac and lacquer are both coalescent finishes. They actually melt into the previous layer of finish a little bit. And you don't need to scuff sand unless you have nibs in it, which nibs, for those of you who don't know, are little specks of dust from the air. There's another piece of paper towel. When one starts wearing out, I just take another one, wrap it around there, and keep building. All you have to do is just keep wiping it on, and the finish will get deeper and richer and glossier the more you wipe. You can control whether you have a satin finish or a really built up finish. French polish is probably one of the best finishes for wood that exists in the world. That's basically what I'm doing here, only I'm cheating because I'm not using a pad and going over it with pumice and rotten stone and all this multi-day process. This is a poor man's French polish. You can see the wood turned out really nice once the finish is on it. I really am pleased with the butternut. I wish I'd gotten more of it, but I only had the one piece. And that's literally as easy as it is to finish using wiping shellac. And this is the pull part, or the peg part I should say. And yes, the lathe is much, much, much messier than doing flat work. Basically a piece of wood spins and I introduce a chisel to it at the right angle and it cuts the wood, carves it as it spins. You can see my safety center there. It's actually a dead center. As you saw when it broke through, it just spun, so you're not going to get a severe catch. There's the round tool rest that I made. Basically 2 pieces of mild steel from Home Depot welded together. I got 3 or 4 tool rests for like $8 using those, and it's fantastic because the tools don't get caught on it because it's round. Here I'm mounting the wood in a chuck. Put up the tailstock just until I get it finished off. Making a little nib for the live center to go into. Here I'm just doing a planing cut. The wood I'm using is dry ash from a neighbor's tree that had come down in a storm. The emerald ash borer killed it and then came down in a storm after it had been standing dead for a while. Here I'm using a caliper to try to get approximately the same diameter for the pieces for the outsides using a parting tool, and as soon as the caliper slips over I stopped cutting. And right there, the memory card got full. So you missed a lot of the pieces. Here I'm basically just turning one of the pegs. This is going to be for a 90%. It's the coned, pointy coned one.
There's the block.
And there's the finished piece.
Pull. You get a blank.
And as you do pulls, there's you put the pegs in the holes to denote what type of coin that they got
40%.
from the pulls.
90%.
And after you're done, you know exactly how many pulls you've done and how many of each type of coin you have.
Get done.
So that was it. Hope you enjoy it. I hope JMB, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you find it useful. Hope you have enough pegs. I think I show you the number I've turned here on the lathe.
This will probably be enough.
If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumbs down. Let me know what you think. And have a great day, everybody.
And yes, I made a little itty bitty tiny goblet for one of them because you got to be kind of nuts or drunk to fly a kite in a lightning storm.